Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we tackle the truly complex, distill it, and help you get smart fast. And today, we're diving into something that really pushes the boundaries of identity. It's this idea of physically changing your race, literally altering your appearance to align with a different racial identity. It's a conversation that sits right at the intersection of who we believe we are and, well, what technology might allow us to become.
Exactly. We're stepping into that fascinating and often pretty uncomfortable space where identity meets evolving technology. Think about it. We already have cosmetic surgery allowing for, significant transformations, but then you layer on the mind-boggling potential of gene editing, and suddenly the ethical, social, and even personal questions become incredibly complicated incredibly quickly.
No kidding. And that's precisely why we're here today, to try and untangle those knots. For this deep dive, we've pulled from a really interesting mix of sources, everything from raw, unfiltered Reddit threads and YouTube videos showing personal journeys to rigorous academic papers and historical accounts. It's a true mosaic of perspectives on a very sensitive topic.
And for you, our listener, who wants to grasp the nuances of this without needing, a PhD in bioethics, our mission is to distill the core insights. We'll explore the concept of transracialism, what it is, and why it's so hotly debated. We'll look at the current methods people are using to, attempt these physical changes, and then we'll project into the future with the rapidly advancing world of gene editing. But the central question threading through all of this, the one we really want you to consider, is this. Just because we can do something, does that inherently mean we should? It's the ultimate ethical tightrope.
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? So let's kick things off with that term you mentioned, transracialism.
Mhm.
It's definitely been in the news, often sparking a lot of outrage, actually, particularly around figures like Rachel Dolezal and Sean King, who claimed identities different from their birth-assigned race. What exactly is this concept at its core?
Well, at its core, transracialism refers to an individual identifying with a race different from the one they were assigned at birth. They often describe it as a deep internal sense of belonging. What's crucial to understand, though, is that this modern phenomenon isn't entirely without historical precedent. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see echoes in phenomena like passing.
Passing.
Yes, where, for example, African Americans in the 19th and early 20th centuries might have used skin lightening products or other means. And this wasn't just to fit in, often it was a survival strategy, to avoid pervasive discrimination and gain access to opportunities denied to them.
Right, right. And speaking of changing appearance, a huge real-world example that really sparked public debate about all this racial identity, passing, was Michael Jackson. He's changing appearance throughout his life, even with his vitiligo diagnosis. It prompted intense public discussion about race, self-identification, perception. It really underscored how personal identity can clash dramatically with societal expectations and these, racial categories.
And that leads us right to the fundamental question here. Is race a biological fact, or is it primarily a social construct?
That's the key, isn't it?
It is, and the scientific consensus, unequivocally supported by decades of research, including the Human Genome Project, is that race is overwhelmingly a social construct. It might seem counterintuitive because it feels so real, but studies show there's actually more genetic variation within so-called racial groups than between them.
More variation within groups.
Exactly. Think of human genetic diversity not as distinct, separate boxes, but more like a gradual color spectrum, blending seamlessly. Scientists call this clinal variation. Even when forensic scientists assign a race to a skeleton, they aren't revealing a biological truth. They're predicting a social categorization based on patterns common within certain populations.
Okay, so if it's not biological, how did this concept of race, as we understand it today, even come about? Where did it start?
That's where history provides crucial context. The modern concept of race, especially as a hierarchical system, really solidified during European exploration and colonialism. We're talking 17th century onwards. Figures like Carl Linnaeus and Blumenbach, they developed classifications, sometimes based on, skull shapes. Pretty arbitrary stuff, really. But these classifications then became deeply intertwined with justifications for power structures, colonialism, and white supremacy. Charles Mill's concept of race as a vertical system really highlights this. It's not just about identity, it's a power structure. Some groups pushed up, others held down.
And these categories aren't even fixed, are they? I mean, they've changed quite a bit over time and across different cultures.
Precisely. You see the fluidity. Take Brazil, for example. Historically, they have more fluid, appearance-based racial classifications compared to the U.S.'s historical one-drop rule.
The one-drop rule, yeah.
Which basically defined anyone with even a single known African ancestor as Black, regardless of appearance. And the fact that the U.S. Census has allowed multiple racial identifications since 2000, that's another significant shift, reflecting our evolving understanding. But here's the crucial paradox. Even though race is largely a social construct, it has had, and continues to have, very real and often brutal consequences for people. It creates real differences and injustices in lived experience. So it's absolutely critical not to ignore the history and lived experiences tied to these racial categories, regardless of their biological basis. You just can't.
Okay, so if race is this complex social thing, and some individuals feel this profound disconnect, this internal identity versus external appearance, what are they actually doing right now to try and bridge that gap? I imagine cosmetic surgery is a big part of it.
It absolutely is. People are using a wide array of cosmetic interventions, from common things like hair dye, makeup, tanning, to much more invasive facial procedures, all in an attempt to physically align themselves with a chosen racial identity. We've seen specific, often controversial examples that really highlight this, like Ollie London.
Oh, yeah, I remember that name.
Right, underwent multiple surgeries aiming to look Korean, driven by an aspiration to resemble a K-pop star. Or Martina Big, who made extensive transformations, skin darkening treatments, lip and nose jobs, striving to appear Black. These aren't just, simple aesthetic choices. They ignite massive public debates about authenticity, appropriation, the very boundaries of identity.
Wow, those are certainly extreme measures.
Mm.
But something our sources kept bringing up is that surgery can only go so far. You can't fundamentally change things like bone structure, for instance. So for some, a full physical transition is impossible with current tech.
And this immediately raises an important question, doesn't it? About the motivations behind these extreme surgeries. Is it truly about authentic self-expression? Or are some of these transformations maybe influenced by prevailing societal beauty standards, potentially leading to the fetishizing and appropriating another culture? There's also the very real concern of self-harm through extreme body modification, pushing one's body to unhealthy limits.
Okay, but what if we could go beyond the surface, beyond what a scalpel can do? What if we could go to the very genetic blueprint? This is where we step into that really futuristic stuff. Genome editing. We're talking about technologies like TALEN, CRISPR, even newer ones like MAGE. Can you help us understand what these are, just basically?
Yeah, okay. Imagine like a super precise biological find and replace tool for your DNA, capable of going in and changing specific genetic instructions with incredible accuracy. That's what technologies like TALEN, CRISPR, and MAGE are becoming, tools that can literally rewrite parts of our physical blueprint. It might sound like science fiction, but this technology is advancing at an astonishing pace. Theoretically, it could be used to alter a person's physical features commonly associated with race, skin tone, hair, eye color, facial structure, even body composition. We even saw a trans Japanese woman explore this potential in her academic thesis, thinking about the implications.
Okay, wow. That immediately opens up a whole new can of worms, ethically speaking. This is truly a minefield, because when you talk about altering the fundamental code of a human being, what's actually at stake?
Exactly. The ethical concerns are profound. You have the terrifying specter of eugenics, the chilling idea of designer babies, and there's a very real potential for this technology to make existing inequalities even worse. Imagine if only the extremely wealthy could afford to edit their genes to fit certain profiles, or attain what society deems desirable.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
We saw a powerful global outcry in 2018 with the He Jiankui controversy. Remember that? A scientist used CRISPR to edit the genes of twin babies. It really highlighted the global ethical concerns around human gene editing, made it crystal clear. Technology is a powerful tool, yes, but society absolutely must decide how to use it responsibly. It's not just a scientific question, it's deeply moral.
Let's unpack this a bit more then. One of the trickiest arguments that often comes up in this conversation is the direct comparison, the one between transracial and transgender identities. You frequently hear that if Jenner, then Dolezal argument, referencing Caitlyn Jenner and Rachel Dolezal. It's used to argue for or against both concepts. How do we even begin to approach that parallel? It feels loaded.
It is loaded. And it's a compelling parallel for some, definitely. On the surface, there are similarities, right? Both involve an internal sense of identity that may differ from what was assigned at birth. And we've certainly seen society's understanding of gender identity evolve dramatically. It's moved beyond just surgery to encompass self-perception, non-binary identities. That shift has definitely influenced the broader conversation about identity in general.
But there are also some really big, crucial differences, aren't there? Differences that make the comparison, well, Much more complicated than it first seems.
Absolutely. And those distinctions are key. First, there's the incredibly heavy historical baggage of race. Racial oppression isn't just about individual experience, it's passed down through generations. And unlike gender, it's intrinsically tied to a whole history of systemic disadvantage that has shaped societies globally. That history matters a lot. Secondly, there are just no clear social or legal rules for transracial identities. Nothing established like the pathways, even though they're still challenging for gender transition. This creates huge ambiguity. And then there's the significant and often contentious privilege question.
Right, the privilege aspect.
Yeah, a major concern is that a white person identifying as a different race, especially one that has faced historical oppression, can be seen as exercising white privilege. Such individuals could, theoretically, always go back to their white identity and benefit from that privilege, a privilege they haven't genuinely shed or experienced the lack of.
And what about cultural appropriation? That seems like maybe the biggest concern voiced in these discussions.
It is, for any. This is when someone adopts elements, clothes, hairstyles, language, practices of another culture. But without truly understanding or respecting its meaning or the struggles tied to it, this can be incredibly disrespectful, even harmful. It can trivialize profound struggles, reducing someone's culture to a costume or a trend.
Like just taking the surface level stuff.
Exactly. And it can also, quite insidiously, reinforce colorism and systemic racism, by valuing certain aesthetics from a culture without engaging with the lived reality of that culture's people. We saw this tension vividly in some of the Reddit threads we dug through, people sharing experiences of feeling pressured to conform to certain looks or feeling their own culture was being trivialized by others adopting only superficial aspects.
It's true that while some individuals genuinely feel a deep, authentic connection to a different culture, there's a valid concern that focusing on physical appearance changes, particularly for those with privilege, can reinforce harmful societal messages about what's desirable. We even saw that Reddit post from a black woman in Europe who felt pressured to look Japanese because of beauty standards there.
And this really highlights a fundamental tension, doesn't it? The individual's right to express themselves versus the potential to harm others through appropriation or even potential self-harm through extreme body modification. It's a very difficult line to draw. And it's worth noting that online communities exist: Reddit, Discord, TikTok, where transracial or RCTA, race change to another, individuals find support. But these spaces also, unfortunately, often contain misinformation and potentially harmful stuff, which adds another layer of complexity.
So how does this incredibly complex and, let's face it, often controversial discussion impact the broader fight, the fight for racial equality and social justice?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, blurring these racial lines raises profound questions. Questions about how we define and commemorate those experiences that are foundational to certain racial identities. Like, how do we honor the unique struggles and triumphs during events like Black History Month if racial identity becomes entirely fluid? It gets complicated. And it significantly complicates the sensitive topic of reparations,
Reparations, yeah, that's huge.
which is deeply tied to addressing historical injustices suffered by a specific group because of their race. Fluidity in racial identity makes arguments for eligibility and even measuring historical harm much, much more complex. You even saw those strong feelings around Michael Jackson's transformation. Again, some fans perceived it as a rejection of blackness. That shows how deeply identity is tied to communal history and perception.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but staying within this landscape of identity and power.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the concept of a global minority. It's a term that often gets twisted into something far more insidious, doesn't it? What does a global minority actually mean?
Right. A key insight here is that global minority is primarily just a statistical term. It's based purely on population numbers and proportions. For instance, white people make up approximately 11% of the global population, indigenous peoples less than 1%. But it's absolutely crucial to emphasize that this statistical reality doesn't inherently mean that a group is disadvantaged or lacking in power.
So numbers don't automatically equal power or lack thereof.
Exactly. For example, a numerically small religious group might hold significant power in a country where it's the majority religion, even if it's a global minority. The term simply refers to population size relative to the rest of the world. That's it, not status or power.
But this seemingly neutral statistical term gets weaponized, doesn't it?
Hmm.
It's often manipulated to fuel a really dangerous and xenophobic ideology, the white genocide or Great Replacement theory.
And this is where we have to be incredibly clear. The white genocide or Great Replacement theory is unfounded. It's dangerous, entirely false, and deeply racist. Full stop. It asserts this deliberate, orchestrated effort to replace white people through demographic changes, often blaming immigration and lower birth rates. And this theory is terrifyingly connected to real-world
That
violence.
correctly so.
Perpetrators of horrific attacks, the 2022 Buffalo shooting, the 2011 Norway attacks, explicitly cited this theory in their manifestos. It also often contains anti-Semitic elements, blaming Jewish people for orchestrating the supposed replacement. This theory deliberately twists the statistical fact of being a global minority to imply victimhood and justify white supremacy and violence. It's vital to reiterate, science, biology, frankly, most major religious and ethical teachings universally affirm shared humanity, not racial superiority. Tribalism and these kinds of fear-mongering narratives, they ultimately destroyed everything.
So given all this complexity, all this history, all this potential future tech, it sounds like our fundamental understanding of race itself is shifting, or at least being profoundly questioned.
Indeed. I think one crucial aspect we're seeing is a broader fluidity of identity across many domains, not just race. We see this reflected not just in these intense debates, but also in more mundane things, like the U.S. Census allowing multiple racial identifications since 2000, and DNA ancestry tests showing universal genetic mixedness, revealing how pretty much everyone has a diverse mix of origins. Controversial concepts like transracialism, while certainly fraught, can act as a catalyst for change. They challenge deeply ingrained social norms. They force us to reconsider our fixed categories and ask, what are the true boundaries of identity and who gets to define them?
And this entire deep dive really forces us, and hopefully you listening, to re-examine these deeply ingrained beliefs about race and identity in a world that's constantly changing, constantly challenging our preconceptions.
We've really covered expansive ground today, haven't we? From the nuances of ethnicity, the social construction of race, to the potential impact of transracial identity on traditions like Black History Month and the complexities of reparations. These issues are, well, way more complicated than they might seem at first glance. There are really no easy answers, and there are multiple perspectives that demand our attention.
And for you, our listener, it's so important to embrace this complexity, to approach these conversations thoughtfully, with empathy and a willingness to learn, recognizing their real impact on people's lives and the communities they belong to.
So, to leave you with one final thought-provoking question for your own consideration, what if genome editing technology advanced to the point where individuals could physically change all of their traits to perfectly align with their chosen racial identity? Would that make transracial identification more legitimate? Or would it further blur the lines between biology, identity, and social constructs, creating even more complex ethical and societal questions than we're grappling with today?
Keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and join us again next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of ideas.